for attending today. We have with us Dr. Sherwood from the Research Resource Facility. I'll tell you right from first-hand experience, she's an invaluable resource for a lot of the research that's going on here at U of L. And not only that, but recently she's had to step up in a big way to help keep everything running smoothly down there. She's currently serving as the interim university attending veterinarian, interim assistant vice president of research services, director of research resources facility and facilities as well. She got her degree from the University of Kentucky in animal science from the College of Agriculture. And today she's going to share a lot of valuable information with us about some of the work they do downtown.
Good afternoon. I understand we have pizza on its way, so we'll pause and let you all get fed when the pizza arrives. So one of the things that has been talked about a lot, at least in the laboratory animal science community lately, is the importance of actually talking about what you do. But before I get really into it, just a show of hands to get an idea of what your experiences have been. How many of you actually have worked with animals in biomedical research? Good. How many of you haven't yet but intend to at some point? Okay. How many of you think that we shouldn't use animals in biomedical research? Okay, good. All right, so part of the reasons why it's important for us to talk about it is because they are. Meaning the animal rights activists, okay? They've done a very good job over decades of speaking how they feel about the use of animals in biomedical research. Doing a lot of protesting. Unfortunately, sometimes they tend to skew the truth a bit and take negative images that do not actually portray and don't tell the full story about what's happening. And they've been terrorists, quite frankly. Some of them have been arrested. It finally became a federal crime to vandalize a research institution in the 90s. Well, no, it was actually in the 2000s. So, you know, they got very scary, right? Pythons in scientists' mailbox out in California and other places. Breaking into labs, setting animals free. The other part of that story, a lot of the animals that get set free, I've seen photos and read articles about how, say, some pigeons were released from a laboratory. Well, most of them were found dead. They didn't know how to find food on their own, right? They starved to death. Is that humane? A colony of rats that were released into a field. Well, it rained, there was a lake, right? They got in the lake, didn't know how to get out. A bunch of them were found drowned. Other animals that they've released have been hit on highways, right? These animals don't know how to live out in the wild. So, a lot of what they've been doing lately, they claim that no research done with animals helps or translates to people, and therefore there's no benefit. What's the benefit? It's wasting money and it's killing animals for no good reason. Most recently, they have basically said that they feel like researchers torture animals, and therefore, since there's a correlation between people that like to do bad things to animals and serial killers, Jeffrey Dahmer, by the way, that researchers might be serial killers, and so that they should have a psychological evaluation by NIH before they get award funding. That was just in the last few weeks. So, looking at the generational lenses, I don't know, I hope that's not fuzzy. Trying to look at the public and where things stand. So this talks about, that part's working. Many different things that have helped to form the beliefs and opinions and the way that things are viewed by the different generations. And I'm focus on the millennials here, and I'll show you why in a minute. So their outlook's hopeful, and I did not put this together. I'm not the one saying this. This was published from a Gallup poll, okay? So their view of authority is polite, correction and conviction, but they've grown up in the age of smartphones. We have a lot of millennials in here as well as other generations. Constant information, a lot of transparency, right? So looking at the trends here in 2015. So as far as the number of millennials in the workforce versus baby boomers and Gen Xers. And look at where we're headed here, right? So it's not a bad thing. It's just something that we need to think about in terms of the millennials' views on things and how good or poor of a job we're doing in giving them informed, the information to make informed decisions. So the Gallup poll, don't need to see all the numbers, however, so the older generations here support biomedical research, right? 60-64%. However, 18 to 34s, that millennial generation, it dips, but definitely a downward trend, 47%, okay, as far as supporting animals in research. What's interesting though is if you look at in the UK, all right, the UK has a much higher percent of people that support biomedical research than in the US. And these figures are just flipped because they wanted to see if putting disagree versus agree changed anything, and it really didn't. So those are just inverse images. So the conclusion that was made, and based on all these polls that have been done recently, are that as far as what the millennials consider is if you're not talking about it, then you must be hiding something, right? Well, why haven't we been talking about it so much, right? As far as the good care that we provide for the animals, the importance of biomedical research, not only to people, but also our pets, right? When people ask me what I do, I say, you know, I get to take care of the animals that take care of us and our pets, right? So that's something that I really feel strongly about. And so why have we hidden so much? Why have we stopped talking about it? Well, because they're really scary, right? That we're really good at putting stuff out there. We're afraid of what people will think about us if we actually say what we do, right? Because of all of this that's out there. So, another reason why this is important is that looking at the trends, we've got these linear lines here, okay? So, as, you know, we saw that other graph where the trend is up as far as millennials, they're going to be the majority of the voting population, right? Voting public. Whereas those that are in the older generations are declining as we get older. So if we get to the point where we have, if we don't change the story and the perception that PETA has been propagating for so many years, it's very likely that, you know, the tax dollars by NIH might decrease because of public, right? Public opinion. They're not wanting to spend money on biomedical research anymore. So, what I'd like people to think about, and also I think it's important, especially those of you that raised your hands and said that you have participated in and conducted animal-based research, is to think about how to talk about what you do and get comfortable with it. How many of you are comfortable talking about what you do and actually talking about the care of the animals? right? Not very many of you. Is it because of PETA and you're afraid that people will think about you if you actually say what you do? It's generally the majority of the case. I used to be that way as well. I've gotten quite comfortable with it, however, because I feel good about what we do and the care that we provide those animals. And I'll go through some of those reasons why, and hopefully give you some information that maybe the next time you're talking to your neighbor or somebody that you don't know about what you do, you feel more comfortable about sharing the importance of your work and sharing the care that we provide for the animals. Okay, so there's a difference. A lot of people think that animal rights is the same as animal welfare, and they're very different. So animal rights, the activists seek to end all human exploitation of non-human animals. That includes seeing eye dogs, other service dogs, bomb-sniffing dogs, and some of the radical extremists don't think that animals should be kept as pets, even. Okay, they think that that's exploiting animals. So animal welfare, and I am an animal welfarist. I didn't go to veterinary school because I dislike animals. To prevent suffering and cruelty to and improve the treatment and well-being of the animals. So we understand that animals can be used for research, kept in zoos, because the rightists wouldn't even have us keep them in zoos. We need to include provisions for the proper care and management of those animals. We have a responsibility for them. So the American Veterinary Medical Association actually has a policy on this, and they agree. Those terms are not synonymous. Animal welfare is a human responsibility that encompasses all aspects of animal well-being. And from the veterinarians, that last statement, the advancement of medical knowledge, right? So veterinarians take note to advance medical knowledge. It doesn't say animal medical knowledge, it says medical knowledge, okay? Some imperatives for animal use. So Nuremberg Code and in the Declaration of Helsinki, terrible things happened to the Jewish population. They were basically forced to be experimented on against their will. They didn't get to sign an informed consent. And the world cried out and said, this can never happen again, right? And so both of these include provisions and statements that no experiments should be done on humans without prior research on animals, okay? I've had people over the years, not a lot, but a few, actually say to me, well, I think we should just, experiment on prisoners, right, human prisoners, instead of animals. Well, when I talk to them, I say, how many stories are there, especially with advancements in science and DNA technology, where people are wrongly convicted? What if you were wrongly convicted? You didn't do anything, but you go to jail. And because of what you just said, that you think that we should experiment on prisoners, you could experiment on. How would you feel about it then? And we just can't go there. So, as far as the care and use of laboratory animals, some of you may be aware of this and some of you may not. And again, to help you get a little bit more comfortable about talking about what you do, there are provisions that we have for the care of the animals and the welfare. And it started back in the late 50s, really, with Russell and Birch and the 3 R's. So, before we start an experiment with animals, we have to look at least these 3 things and then some. Replacement. So, can the use of an animal be replaced with a non-living animal? Right? Computer simulations, cell cultures, tissue cultures, things like that. Mock loop systems. Reduction. So, any strategy that we can use to reduce the number of animals used, we need to do so. Actual number of animals to be used needs to be justified statistically, right? So that it's significant results. I didn't realize you all were right under the path of the airplane. But, so refinement. So anything that we can do that minimizes the pain, distress, and enhances the well-being of the animals, we need to consider and do. So they were really some of the first ones to define, talk about defining and assessing pain and distress in animals. And also bring to the attention that animals that are in pain or distress are not going to give you the best data possible, right? It's going to be skewed. So the better the animals are well-being-wise, the better the data. So talk about recognition. In order to alleviate pain, we have to be able to recognize it. It can be really difficult with some of the species that we have, and so we provide a lot of training on that, especially with the rodents. Okay? They're used to hiding symptoms of pain or distress because otherwise they become part of the food chain, right? So veterinarians and RF are always willing to help talk to people about how to, and do some training on recognizing and therefore alleviating pain and distress. And also, and therefore we can use pain relieving agents once we're able to recognize pain. So back in the 50s, there were no regulations regarding the care or use of animals in biomedical research. A group of 4 veterinarians got together and formed an animal care panel, and they're laboratory animal veterinarians working in research. In 1967, they had a large enough group where they changed the name to the American Association for Laboratory Animal Science, which there's a national organization still today with the majority of laboratory animal science professionals, veterinarians, as well as PhDs, and also laboratory animal technicians are members of, that seeks to provide education and training for the care and use of laboratory animals. So they actually were the first authors of what we now consider the Bible in the care of lab animals, called the Guide, for short, refer it that way. So it outlines and provides references for veterinary care, the housing and environment the animals need and require to keep them happy and healthy. That includes temperature ranges, lighting requirements, both as well as intensity, as well as the number of light hours versus dark hours per day, and humidity. Number of air changes per hour in their housing room to minimize odors and to keep out pathogens and filter pathogens. Personnel qualifications for taking care of the animals. We don't just bring anybody in off the street. They have to be trained and have to be qualified to take care of those animals. It outlines sanitation requirements, surgical and post-operative care, facility construction so that surfaces are sanitizable, right? Can't have unfinished wood because it will absorb a lot of things, right, that we just can't clean it. So, and performance standards and humane euthanasia. So, we didn't have any actual laws or regulations regarding the care and use of animals in research until the 60s. And I'm not saying everything was always great regarding the care of the animals. So back in '66, Life magazine did an expose on animal vendors, right? This actually followed a Sports Illustrated article on Pepper the Dalmatian, who belonged to a couple out in Pennsylvania. They owned a farm, let Pepper out in the evening to go to the restroom before bedtime, and Pepper didn't come in one night. They left their dog Pepper, and they did not stop until they found Pepper. Unfortunately, an animal vendor had stolen Pepper from their yard, or their farm, sold Pepper to a biomedical research institution, and Pepper had been used in a research experiment by the time they found Pepper. So there was a lot of public outrage, as there should have been, with these two articles coming out pretty closely together. And so in the same year that Life magazine article came out, we received the Animal Welfare Act, right? This is the public's response to their outrage if these things happen. And so this is a good thing for the animals and for biomedical research. So the Animal Welfare Act is enforced by USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture. They actually have a division called Animal Care. And so they actually come and inspect all facilities that house animals that are covered under this act at least once a year unannounced. Okay, so I could get a phone call right now saying USDA is here to inspect us, and I'll say, sorry to cut this short, but I gotta go. All right, there's several other entities that also have added their own principles and guidelines as far as research conducted by these entities or funded by them. So I was NIH, VA, DOD, NASA, CDC, and the FDA. And so they came up with a list of 5 U.S. government principles for the utilization and care of animals in testing, research, and training that we have to follow. So another entity, federal entity that oversees research is actually PHS, so Public Health Service. So Public Health Service has a division called the Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare that oversees institutions that receive public funding, right, from the 27 NIH institutes. And so anybody that receives NIH funding or other public funding is subject to the provisions of the Health Research Extension Act that PHS implemented in '85. So another entity that we have, it's actually an accreditation agency, is ALAC. It's the Association for Assessment and Accreditation of Laboratory Animal Care International, and it is an international program. They are overseas, they're in Japan, all kinds of countries accrediting laboratory animal care programs. So it's voluntary. We have to provide them with an extensive program description. They use the guide for the care and use of laboratory animals as a basis for their evaluations of programs. Every 3 years, they require an on-site visit by a council of experts, a panel of experts to come and visit. University of Louisville is accredited by ALAC, and we actually have the distinction of being the longest fully accredited ALAC program in the world. Not just the country, but the world. So we plan to keep it that way. So they come, they spend a week here looking at all of our facilities, talking to all of our Animal Care and Use Committee members, which I haven't gotten to quite yet. We do have an Animal Care and Use Committee on campus. It includes veterinarians, it includes scientists, it includes community members, people that are not affiliated with the university, are not scientists, and they volunteer their time to come and serve on our committee to help us look at the cost-benefit ratio as far as the use of animals. And so no research gets approved with animals on campus without going through an extensive review, right, by this committee and getting approval, right? That committee is also responsible for inspecting all of our facilities, our animal facilities, and all of our laboratories where animals go once every 6 months. So in any given year, we're inspecting ourselves twice. If we find any major significant findings that may be reportable to these outside agencies, then we report them. We also say how we correct them, right? We're also inspected by USDA at least once a year, sometimes twice, though that doesn't usually happen with us, but it could. And then once every 3 years, we have this international accrediting agency with experts in the field to come and assess us. And so we get regulated quite a bit. And I think your pizza is here. So I will break and let you get some food. Yes, no?
We want to look at the end of this meeting.
Oh, okay, sorry. We will continue. So, some people don't realize that nearly, and however I realize I have an exceptional audience. Every medicine, medical device, surgical procedure, or therapy that we have today for people has depended on animal research and testing and originated there for all the reasons that we talked about earlier, right? We're not going to test it on humans, even prisoners, before we test it on people. So this is not an all-inclusive list, just a few things, I mean, even just first aid cream. So when you're talking to people, remind them when their children get, scrapes and bruises and they put first aid cream on it, or they've disinfected it, that's where that comes from, right? Some people making the comparison to their children alone is not enough. But what really seems to kind of give them an aha moment that maybe they haven't thought about before is animal research saves animals too, right? There are a lot of, in spite of what PETA says, right, as far as research not being translatable from animals to people, there are a lot of diseases that we have in common. These are some of them, and certainly not all of them. And so, this is Pookie, who's living with diabetes and getting her insulin treatment, right? Maggie, who's a breast cancer survivor, had surgery, had chemotherapy. Buddy after his heart surgery. Bulldogs are known for aortic stenosis. Lucy after a kidney transplant. The money to develop these treatments and drugs did not come from money aimed at treating animals initially, right? It came from NIH funding, most likely, to find treatments for people using animals, right? So the use of those animals also helps our pets. And so that seems to help a lot of people. Another thing to remember when you're talking to people is we get so used to using our scientific terminology that we forget sometimes about whether they have scientific training or not. And so it's really important to talk to them as if you would your neighbor, right? Explaining what it is that you do and the great benefits that come from it for both people and animals, okay? All right, so there are a number of organizations, these are just the top 4 off the top of my head, that actually are proponents for biomedical research and educating the public about what we do, the importance of what we do, and what a great job we do in the care of the animals as well. And so, I'll put these up here. Anybody that wants one can come take one. I'll pass a few around for you to look at so you can decide if you want them or not. But, so several of these organizations went together and funded the production of these pamphlets. Pass them on around. If you want one, I have a bag full. Feel free to take one. If you're going to do a talk somewhere and want more, I have more in my office, and I'm happy to share them with you, so let me know. So one of the first things some people say, and it's actually in this pamphlet, love animals, support animal research. What? A lot of people don't make that connection. So this is helping people to make that connection. So hopefully we can start changing the tide. That one graph where it talked about in the UK, where they have more support for biomedical research, they've been more transparent than we have. they've started speaking out more about things like what I'm talking about today with the public. They actually have some online virtual tours of their laboratory animal facilities. You can go and click and you get a video tour of the care and the type of conditions in the vivarium. So, you know, thanks to animal research, they can protest longer, but hopefully over the next few years, we will start to see more of these types of protests instead. Does anybody have any questions? Comments? Yes.
It seems like a lot of the bad press that I remember growing up came from these stories from research facilities that weren't necessarily regulated by the government. So, like the pamphlet makes a nice distinction between biological testing versus testing new makeup. So you know, you always saw those videos of like rabbits and things being sprayed in the face with whatever. Is there more progress made on regulating that type of thing, or do they have to answer to anyone?
There is, and also on the development of alternatives to that as well. And one thing, I'm glad you brought that up, because products that claim to be cruelty-free, okay, first of all, do you really want to put something on your face, around your eyes, in your hair, that if it gets in your eyes is going to blind you or your child? Or your dog or your cat, right? Those shampoos too. No, of course not. So, at some point in history, those ingredients were tested for safety. It might just be that that particular company didn't do that testing and they're using ingredients that have already been previously tested by other companies. Okay? So there are different alternatives now to some of that safety testing rather than putting things in laboratories and everything else. And yes, one of the things that USDA has come out with here recently is they are considering going to more of a risk-based approach on their inspections to where they will focus more on facilities that have had compliance issues versus facilities that have had good track records, right? And spend more of their time inspecting those facilities more frequently and less inspecting us where we're doing a good job.